Good afternoon, church. I see a few of you looking at your time. Yes, it is afternoon. If you're visiting Springwood today, a big welcome. We've been on a bit of a journey about a God who speaks, a God who seeks, a God who saves, and a God who sends. And I had a sermon already prepared before I went away. If you hadn't noticed, I was away for a few weeks, got to be staff on Teen Expedition on Fraser Island, and then staff on Young Professionals Camp. So it took me away from church for a few Sabbaths, but it's good to be back. And I had a sermon written for today, and I've kind of paused it. I'm thinking, God sends. I'm going to share my testimony that God sent me into ministry. I did share this in front church, so if you've looked at that online, just relax and enjoy the time here together. So I want to go back to my childhood. I want to go back to 1985. And in 1985, I was in school in Toowoomba, age of 15. And school didn't really mix too well with me. Found myself often up at the headmaster's office and doing a bit of detention time. And at the age of 15, I got offered a full-time job. And it was a night shift cleaning job, commercial, cleaning shopping centres, banks, the mall, Coles, Big W. And I thought, this has got to be better than school. So I went to Mum and I said, hey Mum, can I take this job? And she didn't want me walking out of school at the age of 15. So she said, no, go see your guidance officer. And the guidance officer sat me down and he's looking through my school report and yeah, I think it's okay, you should take the job. So I went back to Mum and said, hey, I got the tick. So I walked out of school at the age of 15, started my first full-time job, which lasted the first 4 years, starting at 1 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock. Now I want to fast forward a little bit to, let's see, 1995? Maybe? I'm trying to remember the dates now. Anyway, let's go back to 15. I'm at the age of 15. Mum and Dad decide that they're moving to Beenleigh. Dad got a contract driving his truck down at the Gold Coast, so they decided to go. I asked, could I stay and live with my brothers? And that worked out good for about 6 months, and then my brothers moved out. I found myself at around about the age of 15 and a half, coming on to 16, working full-time, renting a house and living on my own. Now, some parents may look at their children and go, how would my children go around the age of 15, 16, renting a house, full-time work and living on their own? But it gave me an opportunity to decide, did I want to go to church for myself or was I just going to church because Mum and Dad were taking me? And my assessment was, I wasn't really getting much from church, but my friends were there. So I'd go to church for the social aspect. That's where we would plan what we're going to do Saturday night and into the weekend. And that worked until I met my now wife, Daniela. And she kind of guided me into a stronger relationship with Jesus. And from the age of 25, we got involved in church. I think from the age of 25, I have not stopped serving in my local church in some sort of ministry. Fast forward now to 2008. I'm a manager in an earth-moving company in Toowoomba. Daniela's working in reception in a mining company that builds equipment for South Africa mines. And I've always wanted to have my own job, be self-employed. So I decided to launch a business in 2008. I won't go into too much detail on that today because of time. But in 2008, the first 6 months of that business was very, very successful. I was very happy with it. Until around about mid-2008, if those remember, we had the global economic crisis. When that hit within about 8-9 months, I'm thinking about how am I going to survive? I chose to close that business down on my terms, and I walked away from it. And with that falling apart, we still had our jobs, so we were still doing fine. I just felt like life needed a change. You ever felt like life just needed a change? We're sitting in church, in Glenvale Church, and I'm looking around at the people and going, there's a lot of new faces here. I'm starting to feel like the outsider. So I tried to convince my wife, let's do a sea change and let's move down to the Gold Coast. And it probably took about another 12 months before she decided, let's do that. And I honestly believe in the decision she made was influenced by one lady from the community who came to a cooking demonstration out of the blue and started sharing about this course she was doing at Griffith University in public health. And it caught Daniela's attention. And this lady was going to come back to more of these cooking demonstrations that our church was holding, but she never turned up again. But that was the person who I think had a good impact on Daniela saying, yes, let's move. Sometimes I wonder if that was an angel. Because we found ourselves at the end of 2009 pulling our kids out of Darling Downs Christian College, quitting our good, secure jobs. I had amazing bosses. I worked for them for 15 years. Couldn't ask for a better work environment. But it was that stage in life where I was looking for something different. So we quit our jobs and we moved to the Gold Coast. We had no friends, no family, no church community to connect into. And we started church hopping for 6 months. And for those 6 months, we were restless and we were trying different churches on the Gold Coast, and we just couldn't find a community that we felt like we could connect to. And our children made friends at Gold Coast Christian College, and they introduced us to the parents. Now, some of you are going to know the parents. It's Pastor Sean Berkeley and Cara. You know Sean? Most of you should, because he was a pastor at Springwood Church at the time. And he realised that we were struggling to connect with a church, so he ends up inviting us to come to Springwood. So around about 2010, we actually attended Springwood for 6 months, trying to fit into the church community. And as we're trying to fit in here, Sean gets a calling to go back and pastor at Gold Coast Central Church. And Sean's like, Graeme, why don't you guys come with us? Let's go make an impact on Gold Coast Central Church. And we're like, man, we've been going to Springwood for 6 months. We're trying to settle into this community. I said, look, Sean, what we'll do, we'll come with you for around about 3 weeks, and then we'll come back and we'll still keep trying to fit into Springwood. And that 3 weeks we went back with Pastor Sean ended up being about 9 years. And things changed rapidly at that church, because I remember going to Gold Coast Central Church, and my first impressions of it was, hey, beautiful, beautiful church, beautiful people. But at the time, there was probably only about half a dozen kids running around church. And Sean goes, let's start a Pathfinder club. So we started a club up. We had 22 kids sign up. Like, there was only about 6 in the church. Next year, it was about 48. Next year, it was about 60. The 4th year, we hit 80 children in the Pathfinder club. And the whole church took this whole change to a family, young family focus. Sean got me involved in serving at summer camps, got me involved in serving at big camp. So we wouldn't go to big camp just to be there as a consumer. We always went to big camp to serve in some sort of division. Fast forward to 2014. Danielle and I had been volunteering in 2 different divisions at big camp. And it was coming up to the last Friday night. And I said, you know what? We've been giving this week. I think it's time to have our cup filled. And she said, what do you got in mind? I said, let's go down. Back then it was called the Encounter Tent. There's a guy speaking down there, Herb Larson. I've never heard him speak before. Let's just go down and see what it's like. And we walked into the Encounter Tent. The praise and worship was already up and running. When that finished, we sat down. And I can tell you to this day, I never heard a word that Herb Larson spoke that night. Because the moment I sat down in that seat, I had this voice come into my head. It might sound a little bit weird, but this voice was saying, Graeme, it's time to go into full-time ministry. And for the next hour, I'm sitting there and I'm squirming as this is just repeating in my head. And I'm like, God, what are you thinking? I'm not pastor material. And I'm wrestling this for an hour. Now, I want to fast forward 6 months down the track, because I was sharing this testimony at Gold Coast Central Church one time, and this lady came up to me at the end of the service, and she said, Graeme, and she was from Gold Coast Central. We knew she was a prayer warrior, and she said, I was there that night. in the encounter tent. She says, I saw you and Daniela walk through that tent door, and she said, I had this impression on me, I need to be praying for you. She said, I don't know what I was praying for, but I prayed for you and Daniela for the whole entire hour of that Friday night meeting. I go, wow, that just took me back. Let's go back 6 months. We walk out of the encounter tent, and Daniela looks at me and she goes, what's wrong? And I'm like, nothing. And she goes, no, I can read you. What's wrong? I said, okay, this is going to sound a little bit weird, but I'm sitting there and I feel like God's calling me to full-time ministry. And I looked at her face and I'm going, what is that face for? And she goes, 1 month ago, I had this impression, what would it be like if you went into ministry? I said, you didn't tell me. She goes, I didn't want to influence you in any way. It was kind of a silent walk back to our camper trailer as all this was processing in my head. Went to sleep, and it was a bit hard getting to sleep as I'm wrestling with what's just happened. Next morning, we had to get up at 6 because Daniela was serving in the big tent, volunteering in there on the last Sabbath. And I woke up, and I'm just trying to assess what happened that night. And I'm wrestling with God, and I've got tears running down my face, and I'm like, God, it's not me. You got the wrong person. So I thought I had to justify myself in the presence of God, so I decided to put some doors in the way of God and to lock those doors. So door number 1 was, God, you know I walked out of school at the age of 15. I don't have a senior certificate, I don't have a junior certificate, and I haven't studied since. So there's no way I'm going to be accepted into Avondale. So I closed door number 1 on God, and I hit the deadlock, and I'm feeling this is pretty good. Number 1. But God's pretty powerful. Better put another door up. So I went to door number 2, and I closed door number 2, and I said, God, it's taken a while, but our kids are in a good school and they're happy. We're in a good church and we're happy. So I'm not going to uproot my children and my family and go to another state. So there's door number 2, locked, padlocked, deadlocked. But God, door number 3, if anything was to happen to those doors. Door number 3, Daniela was studying at Griffith University in public health, majoring in health and nutrition and health promotion. She would have to finish that 3-year degree, which was nearly coming to the end. And she would have to find a good paying job to support the family. So at this moment, I'm feeling pretty confident that these 3 locked doors has halted God from this calling to ministry. We packed up from big camp and we went home, and for the next 2 weeks, my stomach's just churning. And I'm feeling this guilt that I said no to the Most High God. And after 2 weeks, I just kind of went, okay, God, this is it. If you can unlock the doors that I've put in front of you, and I'm feeling pretty secure right now, if you unlock these doors, I'll follow. So a few days later, I got the courage to ring up Avondale. And I said, hey, look, you probably heard this over and over, but I feel like God's called me to full-time ministry. But there's a few little things, few little obstacles that I don't think it's going to work, and I just want to run them past you. And the lady was so nice and polite on the phone. And I explained that I hadn't studied after leaving school. I left at the age of 15, and there's no way I'm going back to study year 11 and 12. I'm not going to sit there and do some mature age student test. So that's it, isn't it? And she goes, Graeme, have you ever studied a certificate for? And I paused. I went, well, matter of fact, I have. 8 years ago, so this is in 2014, I said 8 years prior, I had this guy walk into the earth moving office, and he said, if anyone hasn't studied in this industry since they've left school, we're offering a free certificate for and anything you choose. And I'm sitting there and I'm hearing the word free. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get a free certificate. So I signed up for small business management course, certificate 4. And Avondale go, was it recognised by the government? And I said, well, I didn't pay for the course. Someone paid for it. So I sent it through to Avondale and I just left it with them. A few days later, I get a call from Avondale and say, Graeme, this certificate is recognised by the government and this has qualified you to start studying ministry and theology at Avondale College. And my mouth nearly hit the floor, my jaw. This number 1 door was my most secure door I had. The deadlock was secure. And God pushed it open like it didn't exist. And I'm sitting there and going, has God been planning this 8 years prior? Did he plan for this guy to walk into the earth moving office 8 years prior so I'd have this certificate so I'd be accepted into Avondale? I said, well, let me run past you door number 2. Door number 2 was, hey guys, I'm not taking my family out of school. I'm not leaving my current church, and I'm not coming to Avondale to study, feeling secure because they weren't doing distant study. She goes, oh, that's easy, Graeme. We've been planning this for a while. If you sign up in 2015, you'll be one of the first group of students to be able to do the whole entire 4 years as a distant student. Okay. What? Okay. Door number 2 is wide open. And I'm getting very nervous because door number 3 wasn't that secure. So I start ringing up some of my local pastors. I rang up one of the pastors at Gold Coast Central and I said, can I have some time with you? And I sat down and I explained. I said, I need to know, is this a calling from God? I went through what just happened. He says, man, you are called. God is sending you. Now, I need some more reassurance. Maybe he hasn't heard the story right, so I rang up a second pastor. And I said, can I have some time with you? And he goes, mate, God's calling you. He says, if you want affirmation, I want you to listen over the next few months of what people say to you. And then out of the blue, people were giving us affirmation about our ministry and our service in the local church. And for the next few months, for some reason, it just started flooding in. And every time we heard this affirmation, Danielle and I would just be looking at each other, dumbfounded, like, what is going on? At the time, I was a marketing manager for a lighting and electrical company serving Australia and New Zealand in the commercial field, so shops that work in shopping centres. So our customers were like EB Games and Millers and Cotton On Group, all the big major clothing stores and that. And I decided to go up to my boss and have a chat to him about what's going on. Because if God pops open this third door, I've got to give notice. And it's funny, he was an atheist. I remember one of the franchisees started talking to him about coming to church, and he's like, don't talk to me about church. Don't talk to me about your God. But when I spent time with him down in the warehouse, he'd say, what are you doing this weekend? I'm off on Pathfinders. Tell me about Pathfinders. I could speak to him for hours about Pathfinders. So he knew I was a Christian. I said, hey, I need to have a chat with you. This is what happens. I believe I'm being called by God to go into full-time ministry. And he's opened these doors, and I shared the testimony to him. And he was wrestling with it for a little bit. And in the meantime, Daniela had finished her degree at Griffith University. But as she finished her degree, she wanted a job as a public health worker in the hospital system. As she finished her degree, the government decided, let's cut spending and let's axe all the jobs in public health. So when she came out of her degree, there was no jobs in public health. And we're like, what just happened? This third door, she's finished a degree, so it's open halfway. She needs to find a job, but the door wouldn't open fully. And we waited, and she's looking around for jobs, and there was just nothing around. And my boss is asking me, what's happening? Are you leaving me? Do I get to keep you? And I explained this last door being half open. And he came to me again a few days later and said, Graeme, I've got an offer for you. If you're going to leave me, I want to know if I can keep you for another 6 months. I'm going, why? What do you have in mind? He said, work for me for the next 6 months full time, and you have enough holidays up your sleeve to take 2 days holiday every week for your first semester. So take on 2 units, take on half load, work for me for 3 days a week for another 6 months. And in my head, I'm going, no, that's not God's plan. He wouldn't open door 1 and door 2 that easy and then keep door 3 half closed. God has another plan. So I sat back and I'm waiting and nothing is happening. There's no jobs for Danielle. So maybe this is God's answer. So I go back to my boss and I said, I'll take the offer. So I signed up for 2 units, kept working for him for 3 days a week. And I remember getting my paperwork sent to me. And I got my first 2 assignments, 2 2,000-word research papers. And I'm sitting at the kitchen table and I'm reading what I had to do. And I'm reading and I'm staring. And I'm staring and I read it again for 2 hours. I'm staring at this paperwork. In my head, I'm going, maybe I shouldn't have dropped out of school at 15. And after 2 hours, I thought, that's it. I've done. I'm quitting ministry. And for some unknown reason, I pick up my phone and I ring one of the pastors at Gold Coast Central Church at 10:30 at night. Please don't ring me at 10:30 at night. And I ring him up and I said, I'm quitting ministry. He goes, what do you mean you're quitting ministry? And I said, I've got 2 assignments on my table. I don't know how to do a research paper. I'm a hands person. I'm a practical person. I think it's a mistake. And he goes, so what are you doing now? I said, I told you I'm quitting ministry. I'm going to bed. And he goes, no, you're not. I'm coming around. And he hangs up. I turn to Danielle and go, hey, pastor's going to be here soon. 11 o'clock, the pastor and his wife rock up at my house. His wife starts talking to Danielle about what it's like to be a pastor's wife, and he's sitting down and he goes, Graeme, so, you need an introduction. Okay. You need a body, you need an argument for and against, you need a conclusion on this topic. I want you to read these areas here. And he laid it all out for me. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll give it a go. Well, good news. I passed those 2 units. Matter of fact, I passed every unit, which is only through God's power. And now I look back on that and I see God's leading. Because if God had a swung open door number 3 straight away, and if I had 4 assignments on that table, I don't think it would have mattered what that pastor said that evening. I would have walked. It would have been too overwhelming for me. But God, in his wisdom, knew that he had to ease me in steady for the first 6 months to prepare me for the next 4 years of study. We serve an amazing God, a God who is ready to send if we're willing to listen. I'm just going to give me 2 secs. I opened the wrong sermon. I've just gone from memory. But there's a few things I just want to finish on. Let me just fast forward to the end. It reminds me of Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. Isaiah just had this encounter with God where he saw God's glory, felt the forgiveness of God. And it says in verse 8, when I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who shall go for us? I said, here I am, send me. Mightn't have been my way of thinking to get started, but when I saw the power of God, I had no choice but to follow. Isaiah encountered three things in that moment with God. He saw a God who was holy, a God who forgives, and a God who sends. And that same God is still calling today. I know that what it feels to resist that call. And I told God all the reasons why I couldn't follow him. I set up my 3 doors to block him, and I thought I was safe, and I thought I was in control. But God wasn't locked out in the first place. He opened the doors one by one until there was nothing left to say, but here I am, send me. And church, this story isn't about me. This story is about God and God in all of us. What doors are you locking? Not everyone is called to full-time ministry, but we're all called to full-time surrender. Maybe God's calling you, sending you to lead your family with courage. Maybe God is sending you to someone who you need to forgive that's hurt you. Maybe God is sending you to serve in a ministry in our local church that you've been avoiding. Maybe God is sending you to speak to someone who is struggling and hurting. But here's the question I want to leave with you today. If God is about to send you, what door are you placing in front of him? Is it because of fear, insecurity, comfort, uncertainty, or past failures? Whatever it is, what you do need to do is follow his calling. Whatever door you've closed, God is wanting to open that door. As the worship team come back up onto the stage, as we close, I want to give you a moment with God. It isn't about you and me. It's between you and the God who sends. God is saying today, and he always will, who shall I send? And are you ready to respond? Here I am, Lord. Send me.